right. Hello, everyone. I see the numbers jumping up. Welcome to our webinar today. If you'd like to submit questions, please use the Q&A function, or you could chat us directly in the Zoom, whatever you prefer. As a reminder, the recording will be live on our AllVoices website, and we'll also be sending it out as well. I'll drop the link in the chat. Today's webinar is about top 3 learnings of 2022 from diversity, equity, and inclusion and people leaders. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager at AllVoices and also host our interview series, Reimagining Company Culture. This webinar is sponsored by AllVoices. For folks who aren't familiar, we help companies uncover workplace issues by giving employees really a safe space to speak up. And AllVoices is the first platform to really build a space for employees to feel psychologically safe to do so. In today's discussion, we're going to dive into really 3 main learning areas, although there are so many from 2022 as well. But to condense it a little bit, we have the first is employers really need to demonstrate they are actively listening to employees. The second is investing in diversity, equity, and inclusion is a need to have, not a nice to have. And companies need to train, resource, and retain successful leaders and really show that they are doing that. I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to pass it to our panelists to introduce themselves. If you could share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, a little bit about your role in the work that you do at your company, and then we'll dive into this conversation. Alisia, do you want to start?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Alisia Gill. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Chief People Officer at EmpiRx Health, and I'm really excited to be here. Part of our remit, our team's remit is DE&I and L&D and all things to create an amazing employee experience. So I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Timothy, you want to go next?
Good afternoon, good day, everyone. Timothy Ballenger. I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Veolia, North America. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm really pleased to be here today. If you're not familiar with Veolia, it's a global ecological transformation company that I recently joined back in September. So I'm really excited to share really what I've developed and learned in that space over the last few months.
And I'm Amanda Myton. I use she, her pronouns, and I lead the talent management practice area at Lattice. We're a people success platform helping businesses measure performance, engagement, goals, OKRs, manager relationships, and also now DEI analytics. So I'm really happy to be here with you all today.
Awesome. Thank you all again for being here. We really appreciate it. I want to dive into the first insight, which is about active listening, how employers really demonstrate that they want feedback from employees, and not also, creating that space, but what are you doing to say, we hear you, we understand, not necessarily acting on it tomorrow, but how do you know that you're being heard? So what role does the employee voice play in your company culture? I'll pass that to Amanda first.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. This is such a relevant topic. We actually just completed our State of People Strategy report at Lattice, and we survey about 800 HR leaders across the industry. And one of the things that happened this year was we saw employee engagement take the top spot as initiatives that HR leaders are rotating toward. So when I think about engagement, I actually like to broaden that into listening programs. So to get that to be really, really effective, it has to encompass more than just an annual or biannual survey. So a blend of high touch programs like focus groups. One of the things that I really appreciate that we do at Lattice is our ERG councils actually bring feedback directly to our board and to our executive team. That's part of their role in the organization. So making sure that we're raising that feedback in that way, as well as targeted broad initiatives, right? So whether you have pulse, topic specific surveying, onboarding, exit interviews and surveys, and then understanding and committing to actions afterwards, right? That's kind of closing that feedback loop, saying we've heard you, we understand, this is our next step, this is what we can do first, next, later, and being really transparent on the actions that you plan to take.
I like what you said about kind of the listening programs and it not being, we just have this one option, or you could always provide feedback in this way too. You have to really meet people where they are.
Yeah, well, one thing that I'd add to that is when you have a non-hierarchical culture, then that gives you a non-programmatic way to be always listening, so for us, that's definitely true. As we've grown and started to scale, it's still true that anyone can go and talk to the CEO about anything. And it's not a hush hush, what are you doing? Who did that? It's really part of the culture where you can say whatever you want to say. Not that it's going to get acted on. That's not life, period. But will be given consideration. So that's one of the things that I walked into when I joined the company 2 years ago. I started doing a listening tour where I met individually with just about everybody to find out from them. Would you tell me what the culture is? I just showed up. And then they said shockingly similar things. So that was good. But it was also really helpful to know that we have a culture where people want to listen. Their ear is already out and people aren't afraid to say things and feel like it's worthwhile saying them. In addition to some of the programmatic things that Amanda spoke about as well from a survey perspective.
In addition to what Alisia and Amanda shared, I would say that active listening, one of the key fundamental basis for that is emotional intelligence, right? So I too did a listening tour and I'm still on that listening tour. And what you will find is that employees, they want to be heard by multiple levels. Yes, they want to fill out surveys. They will fill out surveys. They will provide that opinion, but they really want that also that front line, that first line of defense with their managers to be active listeners. And so I really think that sometimes, as opposed to just assuming, we just say, oh, we should all be active listening, right? Really providing a framework for what that looks like. So I'm a huge proponent of playbooks and guides to really help guide a manager through, right? If they're used to an old school style of command management, or maybe their manager training, it's been a while, right? It always is a good idea to consistently refresh the journey of the manager, because they are that first point of contact for so many employees, and elevating their awareness about emotional intelligence and why listening is important, right? And then that's when they go to their professionals, come to HR, come to me, come to others, and we can really co-create and take those signals, and that informs our strategy going forward.
I think emotional intelligence is really important to build and emphasize, and also have those frameworks for conversations, open up the discussion, building that environment where people feel like they can raise their hand to give positive, negative, anything in between feedback as well. It promotes innovation and just a great place to work as well. In addition to just having that space, I think it relates to building trust, continuing to cultivate that like any relationship. Psychological safety is something that a lot of folks have been talking about as well, in terms of feeling like you're not going to be retaliated against or feel like you're not risking, your job by giving this feedback as well. So I want to ask kind of directly, what avenues do you offer to really ensure psychological safety when receiving that feedback as leaders, as the organization as well? Alisia, I'll pass it to you first.
Yeah, a psychological safety, that is really huge. We are a values-based company, and one of the values is openness, diversity. There are several that we have, but luckily they're not aspirational. They really are who we are, right? And so it becomes really easy for a company like us, with that as part of our culture, to create forums for people to share, because they know what they have to share will be valued, because we're empathetic and we will take it on board and we'll interact with you differently because of what we learned from you, right? So for example, during Mental Health Awareness Month last year, We had an all hands meeting. People didn't have to come to it, where 4 people shared their mental health journey. Okay, they talked specifically about the struggles that they personally had as it related to mental health, right? That is one of the, talk about feeling vulnerable, right? That's one of the most vulnerable things you can share, much less to the whole company. And I recall during that session, cameras started getting turned off, not because people were all of a sudden going to walk their dogs, it's because people were crying because they were so moved by what they heard, right? So that's an example, a proof point to me that people really do feel that there is psychological safety here. Similarly, during Diversity Month, we had people share their perspectives of their experience of various types of diversity and what happened to them. I spoke about the Black male experience based on what's happened in my family. There's somebody who was a Jewish immigrant to this country who spoke about her experience there. There was somebody from the LGBTQ community who spoke about Stonewall and his journey to really feeling empowered in his space and who he was, right? And so we did that, also very well attended, also totally optional, also a lot of waterworks, and really creating an environment that was more cohesive perhaps even than it was before. And I think people just feel really good about the fact that their colleagues are willing to share. And then, who knows, you're putting the seed in them to perhaps in their own way feel comfortable sharing when they're ready.
To follow up on what Alisia said, when it comes to psychological safety, I really like to define it within the scope, right? So for the working definition that I use when I have meetings and coaching is an environment that's free from harassment, discrimination, retaliation, and intimidation, right? And then in addition to that, I always say that my approach is that I assume positive intent. So sometimes it really is creating the framework, the approach that we're going to take. So basically from the start, setting that tone, right? So how do we create those? Alisia gave a perfect example of listening sessions where an employee share their sentiment, right? Those are signals to employees that I can be vulnerable, right? And then when you start those sessions out, they have to be really well managed, right? Really well managed, but you want to say that we assume positive intent, that what is said here stays here, right? Unless there's something, statutory that you need to act on, right? And then those are the gateways to opening up the doors for employees to know that they are in an environment where they can be safe. And then other things, there's small tactical things that I think that people can do. When I run a meeting, for instance, I kind of send out the rules of the road, especially if it's a longer meeting, where basically I say, cameras are optional, right? I always make sure I send out the agenda. I always say, if you don't want to share your feedback in the moment, I'll send out a post-event survey where you can share that feedback with me confidentially. And so there's just you really want to be very, to me, to build an environment that's psychologically safe, you want to be very thoughtful and intentional about everything that you can do. And this is where that co-creation and that diversity comes into play. My experience, so, some leaders will say they want all cameras on during a meeting at all times because we want to be inclusive and we want to see everyone. Well, when we're talking about environments where we're working in different locations and different sites and different homes and just the rhythm of your day, that may not be appropriate, right? It may not be appropriate. So it really is, what we don't want to do is, in doing good, do more harm. So you need someone who's really a very, a thought leader to kind of really think these things through and then make those values known and shared.
Can I add just one thing? It's a little bit tactful, and it goes back to this question. I think it pulls on a few things, but when we think about receiving feedback, and especially our manager enablement, managers are in sort of that space where they really can help individuals unpack feedback that they receive. And one of the tools that I usually instruct or include in my manager enablement around that is just the simple question of, well, what's 1, 2, 3 ways that this could be true? We want to give you a place to like examine that feedback more objectively. And it plays into this positive intent piece as well. Like, they gave you this for a reason. How could it be true? You don't have to take it wholesale. It's data. Let's interpret it. But giving you that space to sort of separate the interaction from yourself, I think is a really valuable thing that managers can help their employees as they really receive and interpret feedback.
I think coming in with kind of a groundwork for intentions is important, especially when you are giving and receiving feedback, when you are opening up a space to be vulnerable, when you're talking about storytelling, and also meeting etiquette and how we are being inclusive in all of our practices. Someone may not be comfortable giving feedback in front of 20 of their peers on day 5. So having a post-meeting kind of survey or opening up the opportunity, Timothy, of what you were saying, could be more inclusive to get their voice being heard as well. I think, when we talk about belonging and diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not this siloed out program or, something that is separate from the many things that we're talking about in terms of manager enablement and making sure that people feel like they are invested in. And everybody has different diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, just like every person, every company is at a different part of their journey, let's say, too. I want to ask, what were some of your kind of goals or North Stars for your diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives this year, and which goals were met, exceeded, or not met, if you're comfortable sharing? Timothy, I want to start with you.
Sure. So when it comes to diversity goals for Veolia North America this year, really, truly, the goal was to hire me, right? It was really to hire someone who was going to be dedicated to the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. They had a phenomenal approach to how they did diversity before. It was led by the CEO with some external consultants and an in-house consulting firm where they co-created the strategy, right? And all of that work that they did led to saying, we have an idea in mind, we have a strategy in mind, and now we really want to bring someone on board to then with some expertise to really take that and run with it. So that was the first goal that we had. Then secondly, we are our global headquarters is in Paris, right? So there are global goals that we have for diversity and inclusion around gender representation, disability inclusion awareness, and particularly LGBT QIA+, right? And those goals, right, we try to meet at the global level. And we're tracking well on many of those goals, but there's more work to be done. And really what I'm doing is taking that global view and then adding the overlay of what really makes sense for the employees based in North America, right? To then really define out the goals for our zone. But so one goal, again, just to recap, one goal, they brought in the lead for diversity, which was me. The second goal is really that application and texture, because when you're talking about a global organization that's in 220,000 plus employees in many, many countries, right, it can be very difficult to harmonize, right? But it really is, we've done an excellent job on finding what are the things that unite us all. And then within that, though, what are the things that make sense for that specific geography?
I think that definitely makes sense. And also I appreciate kind of the role of your work and how it is a full-time job as well, and how you need to really think about kind of the strategy moving forward, because what works for North America might not work for, different parts of the world as well, and really thinking about how to harmonize that. I love that word too, in terms of, your North Star, but the tangible, how you apply that can be really different depending on where you are in the world as well. And no one has to do this work alone, because there are a lot of great organizations or great subject matter experts, people who are on the ground with similar goals. So I want to ask kind of, how do you work with universities or other external organizations to increase equity, specifically, Alisia, in public health?
Yeah, so, we try to find every opportunity we can to scale. We're not a multinational company, but that doesn't mean there aren't things that you can go out there and do. So for example, we are part of a corporate consortium with a university, Dominican University, that has a very large Latinx population. And they were able to, they got a federal grant to increase the number of underrepresented minorities in population health informatics, right? That's really in our sweet spot. We use population health model as an underpinning, and what we do is pharmacy benefits management. And we are really thinking about how do you improve health outcomes for people? Like, what is it that you're doing for the companies that we serve and the people who work at those companies? How can we improve their health outcomes? So it was a natural thing to do to align ourselves with this university as they're trying to, as they are building out their curriculum, and to help support that, as well as to provide internship opportunities for them, right? So that's something that takes the time of myself, some people who are top talent here, people of color top talent, who will specifically resonate with the people who are in that program. So it's the gift that keeps on giving. And I think it's sometimes people don't think about that, right? They don't think, you know, DE&I, sometimes people can just sit there and say, we got to get our demographics together. You know what I mean? We got to write checks, you know, we have to do things like that. But it's not always about that. It can be about relationships, right? One of the relationships that, you know, we make sure we spend time on is relationships with some of our customers, or many of which are unions. And so there are a lot of activities that they do. A lot of the unions have very diverse populations, and we make sure that we do the things that we can do to be supportive of some of the activities that they have going on. Sometimes there are activities that we're made aware of in the local community that some of our employees know about, right? And so we've done school drives with local, you know, middle schools that need help, that have primarily, you know, Latinx populations, or whatever the, you know, case may be. We're finding ways opportunistically, even though we have an overarching strategy, we're finding ways opportunistically to really have an impact that scales way beyond what we can do internally. We care internally, but we are also corporate citizens, and we want to be a force for change on this topic, period.
I think that's so important. I also think that a lot of companies are thinking about how they can impact their communities, be corporate citizens, and really think creatively, and also, you know, test things out and build partnerships with people that have common goals too, and really open up opportunities. And I think that employees are also looking for this in their employer as well. And I think one of the ways that people I've seen internally, and I was a former employee resource group leader myself, so this is very important to me too, is having that opportunity, having that space to work with organizations as an ERG leader. Amanda, you mentioned the ERG councils and kind of the listening program as well. Can you touch base a little bit about kind of what that entails and how you invest in them, and a little bit about the ERG leadership too at Lattice?
Yeah, for sure. So similar to Timothy, we brought on some new DEI program managers and leadership in our organization in the last year. Lattice has grown really quickly and has kind of in this, what we consider kind of a teenage stage. We're just about 700 people now. And that's a moment where you start to move from you know, kind of ad hoc programs, everyone knows everything, to being a bit more structured. And so when I was talking with one of our DEI leaders this week, she was talking about the journey from when she started, where we had what were more along the lines of affinity groups, to actually formalizing into proper ERGs. So our ERGs are aligned around the 4C model that Robert Rodriguez founded. They are compensated. And one of the really interesting things that I find about the way our program is structured is that it doesn't necessarily, it's assessed on a matrix, right? So it is a performance-based assessment, and that matrix is both in membership size, but also activity and impact. And so actually even the funding model is inclusive of that. So you could have a quite small ERG that's demonstrating high activity and high impact, and they could receive funding that's on par with one of our larger ERGs that maybe is less active and maybe interacting in a more social way. So we've really gotten thoughtful about how we take feedback, how we grow those programs, how we assess those programs and their effectiveness for the different populations across our organization.
Thank you for providing that context and also kind of using that model as well in terms of what are the focus areas, what are the opportunities for people to participate as well, and how can we make them really effective too and make sure that they are seen, heard, and understood. Alisia, you mentioned this a little bit also in terms of the partnerships as well, but in terms of overarching, what is the unique opportunity of role of small to medium-sized growth organizations to really create more equity internally as well as externally from your perspective and experience in public health?
Yeah, and I think that people shouldn't give up. I mean, there's these DEI awards, this is my, in my curl a little bit, these DEI awards are so biased towards large companies. Why? Because they can throw the kitchen sink at everything, right? But that doesn't mean that the small and medium-sized companies, which are most of the companies in the whole country, by the way, can't do really amazing things, even if they're not going to get recognized for it, which is a shame. But they can still do really highly impactful things. For example, over 60% of our workforce is women. We have 100% gender equity. We talk about, thank you. I speak openly about DE&I 3 times a year. Not everybody likes it. I don't care, right? Because this is who we are, right? Not everybody has to work everywhere, right? But if you care about DE&I and it's just not performative and it's just the cool thing to say, that's where the zeitgeist is and all this other stuff, that's fine, but that's not what we're about, right? So sometimes I hear people say, our big initiative, this, and you ask, what is it really all about? You're a big company with tons of money. And the answer is, we're going to start measuring. They're not that they're going to share what they measure, PS. It's just that they're going to start measuring and maybe hire a department, right? So that to me is pretty weak, right? I feel that, the numbers tell the story. Are you doing what it takes to have more candidates that are diverse? Are you being thoughtful about what type of diversity you're even talking about, right? Racial, ethnic, yes. LGBTQ, yes. For us, generational as well, right? We have 4 generations working here, all have different sets of needs, right? We've got remote, I think we're all in a hybrid world. They have different needs. That's another type of diversity. It's educational diversity. There are senior people here who never been to college, right? But that's okay, right? Because that person is bringing a different type of perspective here that reflects the world that we live in, that reflects our clients as well, right? So we have to be open to all of those things. And I think that companies need to be open and tell the story externally and not be shy about telling the story externally. They need to, for sure, be open about telling it internally and be really clear and set very specific targets for what it is they want to accomplish. Otherwise, it's just words, right? Targets, relationships, different ways of being, culture. These are all the things that make DE&I real. And I think, you had mentioned, Christina, that, the workforce is expecting that. More and more, I interview everybody who we hire. And more candidates are pointing out that one of the things that made them want to apply to our company was our stance on diversity. It's brought up a lot, actually. And not just because I'm on and on about how we care about it, is because they did their research in advance and were expressly looking out for that. So it really is a differentiator in helping to attract top talent to your company as well. It's not the reason you do it, but having done it, there are a lot of benefits. So you do it because it's the right thing to do, but also it really does help you stand out as an employer of choice.
There are definitely a lot of benefits, and it's never too early to start as well. I think throughout these conversations too, people sometimes ask, should we start our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives when we are 100 employees, 200 employees, or, should we start at the beginning of the organization? And the answer is yes, you should start. If you don't have it at 100 employees, you should definitely start it then. And you should be thinking about it when you are co-founders or you are founders of a company too, because people can really tell and are asking, and it's a win-win situation for everybody.
Yeah, I spoke with a founder and CEO a couple of years ago who was saying all the words, I want to do D&I, and then casually mentioned, I was at a lunch with some other CEOs and everybody was saying that, we really weren't going to work on this anymore. They were just casually mentioning that. And I said, that's real. This is a person who said that in front of me. As much as I care about this thing, I can't even imagine what is said in rooms that I'm not in. People speaking honestly about what they think about this, right? So as much as you would say that DE&I is top of mind everywhere, it's not. It's not. There's a lot of performative DE&I out there, really. So I think people need to be a little bit more discerning about what commitment to DE&I really means and what it really looks like.
Absolutely. And it's not one person or department or, individual's job to ensure that an entire organization is equitable and people feel like they belong. I think when you sign up to be a leader, there's an additional responsibility as well, because people are looking to you for verbal, nonverbal cues about what behavior is celebrated, what is not, the things that are really important to a company, even if you have the values on the virtual, kitchen table or the physical one as well. Amanda, you mentioned earlier just the opportunity that managers have to really help folks unpack their feedback and also answer questions. And I think, you're talking to your manager mostly on a day-to-day basis, on a weekly basis, and not necessarily the CEO or the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion. When you think about resources, how do you effectively resource managers to have career development and growth conversations with their individual contributors, knowing that everybody probably has different goals?
I think when I think about manager enablement and when I start to step back and think about the programs that I've designed or participated in or that I think are really amazing, it boils down to there's not a magic recipe for manager enablement, and there's not a magic recipe for career growth and coaching and those kind of developmental conversations. It's about practice. It's about getting better at it. It's about creating space and opportunity and building that relationship as a team. I think when I talk to managers, many of them are super self-conscious about having these conversations. They're nervous they're not going to do it right, probably because it wasn't something that was ever modeled for them. They never got that kind of, they never had that kind of mentorship or relationship. That's okay, right? The folks that you're working with are learning too, and it's okay to say, we're learning about this together. They probably actually don't know how to talk about their career aspirations or to really envision what's next. And that's, I think, where managers can kind of open up and say, what do you want your next role to be like when you're not at work? What do you want it to feel like when you're at work? What kind of pace do you like working at? And asking those questions around, they don't always have to be direct into, I'm at, this level of software engineer and I want to make it to a staff software engineer or principal software engineer. Conversations don't have to be that direct. They can be about the type of influence you like to have, the ways of working that you want to expand into. And the other thing that I think is important is managers aren't alone in this. The work we do today is extremely interdependent. And if you look at Gartner's research, they've actually published books about this, but the connected manager being extremely effective. And that means that as a manager, I am helping you find the resources the other team members. I'm connecting you across the organization to get you the support and development that you need. I'm not a single source of truth or power or expertise, but I'm really broadening that out and making sure that you have kind of wide contextualized resources that are appropriate for you.
I would just add to that a couple of things just to kind of tie this together. You know, when Alisia referenced the conversation where someone said that DEI wasn't a focus, right? And then when Amanda mentioned this connected manager, right? One of the ways that you can view DEI work is an incubator for solutions that are targeted for a specific population, but then can be scaled to benefit anyone, right? So in my lens of DEI, culture and DEI, within DEI, I'm working to make the experience, right, of women in historically underrepresented minorities equitable, right? But that being said, if I see a gap in culture where, oh, we don't have connected managers, or there's not enough to connect those managers to, within my purview, I can say, well, let's pilot this idea. I have this idea. It worked. Look at the feedback. Look at the pre-survey, the post-survey. Look at the progression rates, the development rates. It worked, and then scale those. Make those applications available for everyone. So that does two things. To Alicia's point, right, where someone's saying, oh, we're not going to focus on DEI. Well, you are going to focus on DEI, whether or not you explicitly know it, because it's just embedded in the culture, right? It's going to be where people are going to demand it, right? It's going to come up, right? That being said, one way that we can view this is this incubation period. This is our in-house think tank and our generator to try new ideas and test new ideas with these populations who are often on the fringes, right? And then those, you know, as those programs become available, making sure that you have a regular cadence or manager syncs so that they're equipped and enabled to know what is available at the company. Because it does happen where there's many programs, but they get siloed. They could be available to everyone, but not everyone is aware. So you've got to give the manager grace, right? And I always say it's about progress, not perfection. We're not seeking perfection. Perfection is really, you know, the enemy of progress often. If it's good enough and we've been thoughtful about it, move forward.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think incubation and piloting things, I think that's fantastic, and raising it up and showing people examples of what we're talking about. It doesn't have to be brain surgery. It could be a small thing, but it's an extremely high impact thing. And I think the goal is for it to be out of our purview. Like I want all of this to exist outside of me. You know, the woman who was leading vendor management was talking about really doing an assessment as to the minority ownership of some of the vendors that we're working with, and a program to create to make sure that we can really give consideration to a more diverse population of vendors. It's not an HR program. That was her. They came up with that because they know diversity is a value, and that was their part that they were going to play in that, because it's in the fabric of the company. And that's how you know it's working, right? When it's not just us pushing it. I'm happy to amplify it, but I don't need to own everything. I'm trying to create the conditions to run some programs, but also for the conditions for people to plant their own seeds and really make it, you know, real. And then people see, yeah, I can, if they did that on their own, I can do my thing too. And maybe I'll tell HR, maybe I won't, I don't know. It's fine. I just care that it happens. And it can, you can create that kind of culture.
Yeah, especially as leaders, creating the non-negotiables, the framework, the conditions. And I love what you said about amplifying and really the incubation for innovation, because it's true. And I don't think I necessarily believe that anything is perfect. So you have to run with it as well. If you've done the research and tested out, you've asked for feedback. We have a couple of audience questions that I want to get to. I know time is flying by as well. So one of them is, I think this is from our previous discussion as well. What are some questions you've asked in your listening tours? And anyone can jump in.
Questions that I've asked in my listening tour. So one is, I really do try to ask open-ended questions, not oh, do you think the company is diverse? No. Questions about really, truly, and what has your experience been like? What keeps you here, right? Okay, and then also too, I try to do as much information as I can. If it's a one-on-one versus, or if it's a group, like what is the condition of that group? Like how tenured are they? How long have they been with the company, right? And then just say, well, how have things changed over time, right? Or how were you impacted by certain things? So usually I don't start out with questions specifically about DEI. I work my way there. It really is about the engagement, right? And then let them know they can answer whatever they want to answer or what they don't want to answer. But really, truly, it is a story about kind of like, tell me about your story. Tell me about what you do, right? And that also can tell you a lot, because some people will be very specific to the task they may do, but then some people are, they speak more metaphorically, right, about the company's mission. And then from there, I have a list of questions which I can share. That basically I have nodes that then takes me in one direction or the other.
I agree with Timothy. I think the open-ended way is the way to go. It's not a verbal survey. You know what I mean? We don't want to do that. God knows we'll send them a survey, but this is an opportunity to hear those nuggets that they might just mention in passing, and we go, what? So similar to him, I say, why did you join the company? Why? Well, why did you go? Is it what you thought it was going to be? What surprised you to the upside? What surprised you to the downside? What are the opportunities? What are the things, where do you see yourself here? Where do you think your peers see themselves here? Right. This kind of stuff that is very conversational, but that gives them an opportunity to kind of say, if they had something in their mind that they really wanted to get out, my questions are generic enough for them to get off their chest whatever it was they wanted to get off. And then I also do my own personal word cloud, this thing that enables me to create my own word cloud. And I say, what one word would you pick that you say really defines our culture here? Yeah, what would it be? And I'll tell you, the predominant word that I heard was collaboration in our company. That's what people said. So that's what I got out of the listening tour. It was a lot of notes, but it gets really cool when you look at Timothy's point, you see what is the tenure of the person, like you'll analyze that afterwards, and you see, did across the various populations, did people say similar things or did they say different things? Because that's interesting, right? We're just trying to find the insight in all of this. That's the whole point of doing it, right? Apart from developing relationships with people, which we want to do, but also we want to get insights that can help us do real meaningful things that are going to land with people because of what they said they need and what they said they're experiencing. And people aren't wrong about their experience.
+1, people are not wrong about their experience. And this is not, a verbal survey as well. Being thoughtful about the questions you're asking, who you're asking the questions to, and thinking about that data. Another question we have come in is, what tips do you have for presenting new ideas / change to reluctant senior leaders who may not be well-versed in diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, I can start us off. So the question is, the recommendation, if you feel as though you're working with senior leaders who are reluctant to go on this journey, right? Really, truly, this is when I use this saying all the time. You've got to keep your ear to the ground. So one, who knows? If you're new to the organization, who really knows them? Like your senior leaders, and then kind of where do they? Because even though people are individuals, sometimes as a group they will have their own culture, right? And that kind of can give you some insight about how do you want to approach it. But a couple of things that I specifically do. I have this framework that I use that's called best practice, next practice. So the best practice is, I will tell you up front, I can give you data points to support this. I can give you industry benchmarks, right? And therefore, if you are saying that you want to be a compelling company to work for, you're going to need to do this. This is at the minimum, you're going to need to make this level of investment, or you're going to need to do these things, right? Then I have what I call next practice. So it's a little sneaky thing that I do, because I don't always have the data for next practice because it may be a totally new idea or just something that I've rethought, or it may be just new to this particular ecosystem, right? Where I'm saying, no, I don't have the data to support it. What I can tell you is, for these high conviction reasons, I believe this is where we need to be going. So if you want this, if employee sentiment and engagement, right, and talent attraction is important to you, right, we have a baseline of best practice, but then there's also these next practices. I just may not be able to tie out the data just yet, right, but there's, and speaking of data, there's all sorts of ways that and Alisia was speaking a lot about the data. I want to say data can come in all forms. Qualitative data can be just as valuable as quantitative data. So really, when you're out here doing this, survey before you start, survey in the midpoint, and survey at the end. I then would that way, with those surveys, you can get a sense of what the employees thought, and they will tell you, and you can do a net promoter score. Then, though, let's just say you did a program for, the idea was maybe you didn't market it, but it was retention, but the retention didn't go down. Well, what you could do is then say, ooh, well, we were hoping that retention would go down 1%. It didn't go down, but I can look at the surveys, and then I can look at the programmatic investment that we did. And I could also look at exit surveys and exit interviews to give more color around that, right? So there's all sorts of, so think about all the different types of data points you use, and then that will help you create a narrative, and then collectively you can co-create for that team, that senior leadership team that may be reluctant. You can then co-create and guide them, because part of the work that we all do on this call is we're coaching, right? We're coaching, we're consulting, we're advising, you can then collectively come up with what does the next best step look like for us, right? But I would say with the reluctant team, you need to show them that what is the risk of not doing it, right? What is it? So, okay, you're reluctant. Well, if we don't do it, this is what we're going to look like. We won't be able to attract these types of folks, or will be, not best in class, right? And then showing them with the data for the best practices, but then where I can't prove it with the data just yet, I call it next practice, and then it's clearly defined.
To build on that, the other thing that I have had success with in various programs is, going where the love is, right? Where do I have that in? Where do I have a leader that is engaged? Because it may be, right, we're our own best use case. And if I can build out a successful pilot and we can start to see change in one area of the business, that is extremely compelling for other leaders in the organization, right? Now I have a champion inside of that group. They speak that language. They know that internal culture. And so how do I kind of bring those champions along and help them further my cause inside of the leadership of the organization?
One thing I'd add to that, especially since the question was around senior leaders, right? The most senior leaders in the company or organization should be wearing enterprise hats. They should be, and let's stipulate to the fact that the company wants to continue to be a going concern. And let's stipulate to the fact that they probably want to differentiate themselves in the marketplace. And that key to doing that is being innovative. Okay, so if they agree to that, let's think about what are the criteria that are required to be an innovative, dynamic company. I would stipulate a homogenous company is not that. Okay, so if I can have a business level conversation about I'm kind of backing into it, but basically, if you really want to serve the world or whatever your marketplace is, then you have to have people who can speak to it on, whatever dimension of DE&I you're looking at, right? You need to have people in the room who know about those populations. It can't just be you and the people from your school and the people who worked at the jobs you worked at and the people your age, right? That's groupthink. You already know what you think. You're trying to figure out what others think. You need other voices. And please help me understand, if you're a true leader, why you don't want more data to be better. Please explain that to me, right? You don't even have to be a true believer in DE&I because it's the right thing to do. But if we just were looking at it from a dollars and cents perspective, you kind of got to go, what kind of business model are you running that doesn't take the diversity of our economy and skills into consideration in everything that we do, right? That's, I would sort of frame it in that manner.
Thank you for answering some of our audience questions. I want to wrap up our conversation with a call to action that people can take with them watching live and on demand. So what is your, CTA call to action for people and diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders, both formal and informal, as we head into the new year for 2023? Out of like the many things that we talked about. Amanda, I'm going to pass to you first, and then you can popcorn to the next person.
Perfect. I like to sum it up into just 3 words, which is listen, understand, and then act, right? We've spent time in this call talking about the different listening strategies, whether that's seeking feedback widely through focused interactions, through listening tours. Then you have to seek to understand, right? Why are we seeing that? How does that apply within our business? What is the larger context of the macroeconomic environment? How do we apply that across the different demographics and dimensions inside our organization? And then act, right? Because if you only take information in and it doesn't produce results and we don't communicate what those actions are, that's as meaningless as not having done. Actually, and in some ways it's more detrimental than having never opened the question to begin with. So I always tell folks, you've got to start with the end in mind. You've got to think about all 3 stages from listen, understand, and act, even at the very beginning. So I'll sum it up there and I'll pass it over to Timothy.
Thank you, Amanda. My call to action really is I want leaders in those champion positions to really understand more about and incorporate the experience of all employees, right? Not just the C-suite, not just grade X and above, right? I say this all the time, the E in DEI stands for equity, not exclusivity, right? So and not elitism, right? So really, truly, nirvana, the ideal state for DEI is that the magic that you create can be felt by every employee. I don't care what they do. I don't care where they sit, but they can feel that magic. And Alisia, for closing thoughts.
Oh, wow. You said magic. Now I have to follow it. To be magical. Okay, so what I would say is it's all about the North Star, right? Who do you want to be? It can't just be a collection of activities that people did, right? Fundamentally, what is your company about and where do you stand? Because once you get clarity on that, everything else then falls together, because everyone can align themselves to the organizational North Star as it relates to DEI. That's going to be the answer to when something crazy happens, like the George Floyd situation, it's clear what you're going to do. If something happens and you see your population is not reflecting your local labor market or not the national labor market, well, you know what you're going to do, because your North Star was, we're going to represent the world. We're going to represent the country in which we work and the clients that we serve. If that's your North Star. But I think, and if you want to sort of increase diversity in the industry and have an impact there, then that would inform what you do there, right? But I think it's really important for the senior leadership to really define the North Star, repeat it over and over and over, and create the conditions, including time and money and relationships, to make sure that we can deliver on that North Star in really, really collaborative and innovative ways.
All really great calls to action, really big calls to action as we end our call and really think ahead for the new year. Amanda, Alisia, Timothy, thank you so much for being on our webinar today. Thank you to everyone listening. We really appreciate it. And we will see you next year for our webinars. And have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.